A woman awaiting her execution while telling her story to a priest to the actual events of that story. Luis Vargas, a Cuban man, sends for American Julia Russell from Delaware to be his mail-order bride. Julia comes off the ship, looking nothing like her photos. Julia explains she wants more than a man who is only interested in a pretty face, so she substituted a plain-looking woman's photo. Luis also admits to deception. He has misled her into believing he is a poor clerk instead of a wealthy plantation owner. Julia says that they both have something in common, that both are not to be trusted, but they assure each other that they will try to understand and trust each other in life. Luis and Julia wed in the church within hours of her setting foot in Cuba. Luis falls desperately in love with her and begins to explore her sexuality. Meanwhile, Julia's sister Emily is worried. She sends an emotional letter asking about her welfare. Luis forces Julia to write back, fearing that if Julia continues to ignore Emily's letters, Emily will assume something terrible has befallen her sister, and she might send the authorities. Holding off as long as possible, Julia finally pens a letter to her sister. Luis adds Julia to his business and personal bank accounts, giving her free rein to spend as she pleases. A detective, Walter Downs, arrives from Wilmington and tells Luis that he has been hired by Emily to find her sister Julia and would like to see her on the coming Sunday. Luis informs Julia about this, and she gets upset. Emily arrives in Cuba to meet Luis and shows the letter Julia wrote to her. She informs Luis that she believes Julia to be an imposter and that her sister may be dead. Luis discovers that Julia has taken nearly all of his fortune and teams up with Walter to look for her. Luis finds Julia and discovers she is actually in league with Walter. Luis believes she loves him and lies to Walter, but when confronted, a fight breaks out, and Luis shoots Walter. Julia sends Luis to go and buy them tickets home, but it was a trick, and Walter is not dead. Julia appears to love Luis but fears Walter, so she and Luis run off to live secretly, with the supposedly dead Walter in pursuit. Walter turns out to be Julia, Bonnie's old lover and partner, Billy. Billy makes a cut on Bonnie's back before having sex with her, as he did during their previous encounters. Luis throws away his promising future to be with Julia/Bonnie. One night, Luis follows Julia, otherwise Bonnie, and discovers Walter, otherwise Billy, is alive and that the two are still working together. She is apparently going to poison her husband that very night. He returns home to wait for her, and when she arrives, he reveals that he knows about the plan, confesses his love for her once more, and swallows the poisoned drink. Julia flees with the dying Luis. With Walter close behind, they run into him at a train station. Walter is furious that Julia has betrayed him. As Walter holds a knife to her throat, Luis shoots and wounds him, with Julia finishing him off. Back in the Meissen scene, Julia finishes her story and asks the priest to pray with her. The next morning the guards come to her cell to take her to her execution, only to find the priest kneeling in her clothing. In Morocco, Juliet is watching a card game. She walks around the table, occupied by gamblers, including Luis, and thanks them for allowing her to watch. As Julia signals Luis about the other players' cards, he begins telling them the story of how they got there.